Welcome to Dental Business RX. Practice success in 30 minutes or less.
Thank you for calling ABC Dental.
Productive and efficient. These are the two words we hear the most when a dentist describes what they would consider to be their ideal schedule. And I get it. The last thing you want to do is work a 10-hour day out of 3 to 4 chairs, bouncing from room to room and patient to patient, all while running 20 to 30 minutes behind for most of the day, and to find out at the end that you only produced about half of what you had as your daily goal. It's frustrating, demoralizing, and outright stressful. And dentistry, more than most, if not any other business, truly runs on 10 to 15-minute intervals. It's a tight schedule. And the schedule itself is the heartbeat of the practice. It governs most, if not all, practice functions. It at least touches them. And it determines how productive you are, determines your revenues, and when handled incorrectly, can be a huge source of stress. So how do you build a schedule that runs smoothly, on time, allows you to eat lunch, gets you out of the office when you're supposed to, and that is consistently productive? Well, that's what I want to talk about in this week and next week's episode of Dental Business RX. Yes, this is a 2-part series, specifically how to assemble the ideal schedule for your practice. My name is Jeff Bloomberg, and I'm your host. And before I start, I should mention that I've wanted to do this episode for quite a while. My biggest concerns were the size of the subject and the visual aspects of explaining it. How do you show a schedule or changes in the schedule and so on? It's a large subject. There's a lot of data to cover. We do a 2-day seminar on the subject here at MGE, Scheduling for Production, and we have about 7 hours of training on our online platform, DDS Success. I'll put links to all this in the description, where we cover the art of scheduling productively, which is for the whole team, as well as about 4 hours of training for the schedule coordinator. Point being is it's a lot. There's a lot of material to cover. So the worry was, how do I put this in a podcast in a way that people can actually use it? So I think I've figured this out. You can let me know at the end, but I decided to go big or go home. I didn't want to just cover a little tip here or there, because without the other parts of the system, it wouldn't make a ton of sense. So we're going to hit the whole thing. We're going to cover everything that I think is coverable in a podcast format, and I'll have visual aids when applicable. You guys can tell me in the end again how we did. So what are the episodes going to cover? We're going to cover how to structure this whole thing, but then we're going to get into some specifics. Specifically, what should your scheduling plan or system be able to do? How to set weekly and monthly goals. We're going to cover how to class different types of procedures with relation to the schedule and then determine how long those procedures actually are. We're going to talk about how your dental assistant fits into this, how to productively double book, how to structure the schedule to fit emergencies in without wrecking the schedule for the day, and how to put all these tools together so that you have the basics of a system. So with that, being that there's a lot to cover, I say we jump right in. Let's start with our first point. What should your scheduling plan or system be able to do? What are some of the basic requirements? Well, there are 4 basic requirements. The first one is whatever you structure has to have time allocated for specific things, and it has to be properly allocated. Meaning there's time on the schedule when certain classes of procedures are done, which I will be talking about later in this episode. And in addition to accommodating any schedule, what you've already got on the schedule for that day, there has to be a degree of elasticity with the schedule to accommodate the unexpected. Things don't always go right in dentistry. A patient shows up 15 to 20 minutes late. A tooth breaks during an extraction. Patient's not getting numb. Whatever system you're using has to accommodate this without destroying everything. It has to be robust, because if you don't have that set up, then you might have the most beautiful system in the world, and one thing goes off by 10 minutes and the day is wrecked. So your system has to accommodate the unexpected. The next point that your system has to be able to do is it has to accommodate, or allow for, rather, expansion. If you're doing what you're doing now and you want a system that will keep you doing what you're doing now, you already have it. You're producing $50,000 a month and working 30 hours a week. Well, your system's doing that. You don't need to make a change. So if you're going to make a change, it's because you want to expand, increase efficiency, and so on. The office needs to be able to grow within this system. You need to be able to see higher volume. You need to be more productive. You need to maximize efficiency and eventually allow for potentially more providers. The third thing your system has to be able to do is it has to allow for time to sell. If you want to produce $8,000 a day as a dentist, you have to sell at least $8,000 a day in treatment, meaning patients have to accept it. If you don't have that time built into the schedule, which allows you time to sell, which I've talked about in prior episodes, I think it was episode 27 and episode 1, then you're not going to sell much, if anything. You need to have time allocated. And one thing I should note here, just on the subject of scheduling, specifically how sales relates to it, beyond the fact that if a patient doesn't accept it, you're not going to be able to do it, is the subject of cancellations and no-shows, because again, those obviously affect the schedule. Well, one thing you'll find is if a patient makes some form of a commitment, especially for bigger treatment plans, they're more apt to show up. If I come in your practice and you present a $7,000 treatment plan and I tell you I'm going to bring you a check when I'm scheduled next Wednesday, there's a better chance I'm not going to show up if I've paid nothing than if I had given you something before I left. If I make some form of a commitment, whether it's a deposit for bigger treatment plans, or I prepay and maybe I can save a couple of dollars by prepaying, there is a much better chance I am going to show up. And you can actually eliminate a lot of the cancellations and no-shows on the doctor's schedule with proper financial arrangements. So you have to have time to sell, and you have to make sure the finances are properly handled with your scheduling system. Last point, and this one is a biggie. To make your system work, someone has to be, someone, not ones, one has to be ultimately accountable. There has to be one person responsible for the schedule. I can't say this enough. Now, does that mean nobody else helps? Does that mean if the office is running 30 minutes behind that you don't all put your heads together and figure out how to get things back on time? Absolutely not. Everybody has a part in fixing that. But when it comes to scheduling patients on the book or in the computer, however you're using, most likely a computer, when it comes to scheduling patients on the book and filling openings in the schedule and making sure that the schedule is productive, there ultimately has to be one person who owns that. Now, in a lot of practices, and I've discussed this in prior episodes, you have the proverbial front desk, 2 or 3 people at the front, and everybody does a little bit of everything. That does not work for the schedule. If everybody's doing a little everything and nobody's accountable for anything, if I have an opening in the book and I go up to the front, everybody's going to stare at each other. Who was responsible for this? Well, really nobody. So one person has to be responsible. Of course, other people can help at times. And how would you do this in your office now if you've got one of those traditional front desks where 2 or 3 people all do a little bit of everything? Make one, even though they may have other functions, make one person the schedule coordinator. Maybe the one who's best at scheduling. Probably not a bad idea. Someone has to be accountable for this. So those are the basic requirements to make the system work. Let's walk this forward and start looking at how do you set monthly goals. Now, setting a goal, deciding how much you want to collect or produce, obviously should be realistic. If we produced 105 last month and I want to do 120 next month, that's fairly realistic. If I say we did 105 last month and I want to do 1 million next month, that's probably unrealistic. So A, it should be realistic with maybe just a little bit of a push. All right. The next point is if I'm setting my monthly goal, I probably don't want to set it less than last month. I mean, there might be mitigating factors. We're not in the office for 2 weeks, but I generally want to set it for a little bit more than last month. And just to speak to that, I've actually seen clients do this. I remember talking to a client about this in 1999. This is the first time I kind of challenged somebody with this idea. I was talking to a dentist, and he was going to be out of the office for 2 weeks. And he was, concerned because his staff were hourly and should he pay them? And they want to get paid, but he's not going to be working and he's setting himself up for a bad month. So we made a little bit of a game. Look, if you tell the staff that if you hit your normal production or collections goal for the month in those 2 weeks, they get to work from home and make sure the phone's answered and that emergencies go where they're supposed to for the last 2 weeks, and they're going to get paid. Everybody's going to get paid what they normally get paid, but they don't have to come to work for 2 weeks. And he would round robin the phone when he forwarded the phone. So we presented this to his team, and they were game. And he told me afterwards, this was again, 1999. He was doing about $65,000 a month, and they did $65,000 for the month he was off 2 weeks. And he told me he never worked harder in his life. It was fun, but man, his staff had him running room to room because they were going to make this game and make this goal. So you want to set your goals. The point being is there's no reason to set your goals lower the next month. So you want your goal to be realistic, and you probably want to have it to be a little bit higher next month than it was last month. So once we've established what our goal is going to be, let's say we want to produce 100,000 this month. How do we break this down further? Because we want to make sure in real time as we're going through the month that we're achieving our goal. Well, we take that 100,000 and we would divide it by the working days for the month. So let's say we have 17 working days this month. We would take the 100,000 in production, divide it by 17, and it gives us kind of an oddball number here, which is $5,882.35. I would probably say 5,900 for simplicity, because that's just hard enough to say as it is 55,882.35. So now, I've told everybody that the monthly goal, and the office manager should do this once they've established the monthly goal with the doc. The monthly goal is 100,000, which means we need to do 5,900 a day. What's the next thing I'm going to do? I'm going to take that 5,900 I want to do every day, and I'm going to subtract my hygiene production. Now, by hygiene production, I don't mean what would be a great day for the hygienist, but what I can confidently expect the hygienist is going to produce every day. Confidently, in our sleep, not a problem. Unless something disastrous happened and half the schedule canceled, I can assume this is how much the hygienist is going to produce every day. Let's say in our example here, we know that our hygiene area is going to produce $1,500 a day. So we've got our daily goal of 5,900 a day, because we have a monthly goal of 100,000 divided by 17, daily goal 5,900. Hygienist is pretty much guaranteed to do 1,500 of that, which means the doctor has to produce 4,400 per day. So now, what am I going to do with that? If I've set that at my monthly goal and I've done it before the first of the month, or I did it on the 31st of last month or whatever, and I've broken it down for the team, I would have the team involved. They should know what the office is trying to produce. You obviously don't want them to just associate it with money, because let's be real, production and collections represent to a large degree how many patients you're actually helping with needed dental treatment. I would have the team on board so they know what we're trying to do. And then every morning when I do my morning production meeting or my morning huddle, I would let the team know where we're at for the month so far. I mean, the schedule coordinator should actually let the team know this. But let's say day one comes and we're at 4,900. Well, we're 1,000 below. We have to account for that because we have a $100,000 goal in these 17 days. So then we make that up the next day and we're on track again. Or we don't, and we need to take further action to get ourselves back on track. You want to check these things in real time to make sure that you're actually meeting your goal. You don't want to wait and do nothing until it's the 20th and you find out that you're way off and there's nothing you could do to fix it. So that's how we set monthly goals and break them down daily so we can more or less move them into bite-sized, more easy to handle pieces, and we can fix things if they're going in the wrong direction before they really go in the wrong direction. So now, if you're building this system, what are the types of procedures? Generally, this is what we teach our clients, by the way. What are the three classes? I mean, there's a lot of procedures that you do, but how do we class these procedures for the purposes of scheduling? We have three basic classes of procedures. The first one is what we would call a primary procedure. Now, what is a primary procedure? This is a high dollar or high cost procedure, regardless of how much time or how many visits are needed to complete the procedure. So it's high dollar. Now, a couple things about this. We can go over our obvious examples: crowns, implants, veneers, endo, denture start or a partial, Invisalign, etc. These are high value procedures to charge out for quote unquote production. But we're not just classing it against those types of procedures wholly. We said high dollar, or whatever currency you're using, depending on where you're listening to this from. What if someone needs 12 composites? That could potentially be a high dollar procedure, especially if you're going to do them all in one visit. So we're looking at the overall value of the procedure to determine if this procedure is a primary. Again, for the most part, these are going to be crowns and implants and veneer cases, etc., inlays, onlays. But there could be instances where it's what we would not consider on its own a simple, one composite is not a high dollar procedure, but a lot in one visit could be. So we have primary treatment, high dollar procedures. The next class of treatment with relation to the schedule is what we call secondary procedures. These are medium to low cost procedures, middle to low dollar, regardless of time and number of visits. These would be basic restorations. Maybe you're doing bleaching or a night guard. It might be a new patient exam if it's on the doctor's schedule, or an emergency patient. Now, I know an emergency patient might become a high dollar procedure, but the truth is, until the patient comes into the practice, we don't know. So we classify that as a secondary procedure. So we have primary and we have secondary. What's our third class of procedure is something we called a tertiary, meaning third, procedure. What are tertiary procedures? No charge procedures. Crown deliveries, adjustments, consults, etc. There's no charge associated with this procedure. We call that a tertiary procedure. Now, a couple notes on this. Consult appointments, where you're actually presenting treatment, is a no-charge procedure, but from a production perspective, but it's extremely important from a sales perspective. That's where your future production is going to come from. So you don't want to, keep that in mind as you're scheduling them. And the next point on this, as far as types, I just want you to think with something, because I've seen variations of this concept over the years where you have a practice, maybe they're not meeting their production goal for the day. So they have a patient scheduled for, a veneer delivery at 3:00. And then a productive emergency patient comes in and they'll bump the patient who needs the 4 veneers delivered because this other procedure is productive. I'm not a fan of that. And I want to give you a little bit of a different viewpoint here. And it's just something funny the way dentistry is set up. We have this concept of production. Really, what is production? It's when you've charged out a procedure. So if you're doing crowns, when you prep those crowns, that's production. You've charged for the crowns. Now, you may not have submitted insurance depending if they need a seat date, whatever, but you've charged for them. They're on the book as production. And when you bring the patient back in to deliver the crowns, that is a no-charge appointment. All right. So we will go from a primary to a tertiary procedure there, right? But let's look at it from the patient's perspective for just a second. So when you prep my teeth, my 4 teeth, I have 4 little nubs in my mouth now covered by acrylic or metal or whatever type of a temp that you are using. For me, I'm glad that the decay was addressed and I'm getting these crowns done, but this is not the big reveal. This isn't the appointment I'm really looking forward to. I was numbed up and drilled on, etc. The appointment I'm looking forward to is when you place the permanent restoration. That to me is the big reveal. That's why I'm in this. I'm here to get the crowns. Or if it's veneers, it's when I get those pieces of acrylic out of my front teeth and I actually have some real porcelain veneers in my mouth that I can smile now. That's the big reveal. That's the big appointment for me. So you have to think with this. I personally am a fan of, if we put somebody on the book or we schedule somebody, we honor that no matter what is going on, unless it is physically impossible to do so. The doctor's out of the office not feeling well or something like this. So I am not a fan of bumping non-productive procedures for productive procedures. Now, if there's no structure to your schedule, that might happen. Whereas if you have structure, that won't happen. So it's very, very important. It's bad customer service to have to bump these people out. So it's very important that you structure the schedule correctly so that this does not happen. But always consider that the delivery appointment is most important to the patient. Even though it's not productive, that's the one the patient is looking out for. All right, so we have primary, secondary, tertiary. So what you're going to want to do from here is start taking a look at how do you want to structure your schedule. Now, I'm going to give you something that isn't new or a new idea, but there's a reason this idea has been around for a while, is because it works. I normally recommend that people put primary procedures in the morning. That's the time you allocate for primary procedures. Why? Because it's a lot easier. Let's say you work from 8 to 5, 4 days a week. If you come in at 8:00 and your first primary procedure is, at 8:30 or 8:40, you might be doing some consults in the morning, which I'll talk about towards the end of next week's episode. If I'm going from 8:40 in the morning till, let's say 12:30 is lunch, and that's all primary time, by the time lunch comes, if I'm scheduled correctly, I've already hit my daily production goal. The afternoon, I can just do my thing and I have zero attention on, oh my gosh, we're $2,000 below where I need to be, or wow, we're way behind where we should be. I've already made this by lunch. Now, I'm not saying that this is what you have to do, but if it were up to me, and I've had clients do this, if they work Monday through Thursday, that's primary time. Mornings are primary time. After lunch is when they do their secondary and tertiary procedures, for the most part, which again, I'll talk a little bit more about. And then their goal is met by lunchtime. Now, where does this tend to go wrong? A couple different places. And where it might be going wrong is either A, with your scheduler or whoever's scheduling appointments, or B, you might actually have to make some accommodation for a large portion of your patient base, or for a portion of your patient base, rather. Let's start with the second concept. So let's say you just have a lot of patients that work second shift or third shift or whatever, and they can't come in the morning. They can't do it. And let's say that was a large portion of your patient base. Well, then what you might do in a case like that is you might have primary time first thing in the morning, 3 days a week, and then flip it on the 4th day, primary times in the afternoon, right? You can accommodate things like that, or maybe it's more real to you that you want to do primary time in the afternoon on certain days of the week. Again, I recommend you do it in the morning. It makes life easiest. But then on the other side of this, you might have some inefficiencies at the scheduling position. So you tell me that you only want to do productive procedures in the morning. And we need a bit more structure than that to really make this stick. But you tell me, Jeff, I'm your scheduler. I want to only do production in the morning. So I talk to a patient. They need to have 3 crowns prepped, and we got to get them scheduled. And I say, the doctor wants to see you in the morning for this appointment. The patient says, well, I have to be at work, and there's no way I can miss work for that. I need an evening appointment. I need to come in at 5. All right, so right there, let's say that happens to me 2 or 3 times that day, and let's say as the scheduler, I schedule them all for 5 o'clock. So the third patient that you're supposed to be doing a large prep on is scheduled for 4 weeks from now because they can only come in at 5. As the doctor or the office manager, you might look at this and go, well, why do we have all these people scheduled out in the evenings? And I go, well, doctor, they couldn't miss work. They couldn't come in the mornings. They just refused to schedule. As the doc or the OM, that might start to give you the idea that morning scheduling just doesn't work. And it's actually not true. But it gives you the idea it doesn't work because your scheduler couldn't schedule them. Here's all I'll say. I've seen instances where you take scheduler A and they can't schedule people in the morning, but then you put scheduler B talking to those same patients and they all of a sudden can. So it's the person themselves to a degree. You could also give them a couple hints as far as how they go about doing it. And there's also things that you as the doctor can help to make sure if you want to make your primary time in the morning to make this work. So let's say as the doctor, you're presenting a treatment plan and the patient wants to do it, and you've gone over the fees and whatnot, and the patient's very excited about it, you might tell them, so Bill, I do these procedures in the morning. It's the only time I do these procedures. You might even ask your treatment coordinator at that point, hey, Joe or Sally or whoever your treatment coordinator is, when is my next appointment available for a procedure like this? And they say, well, Thursday at 10:30, doctor. Joe, could you be here Thursday at 10:30? Yeah, sure, doc. Okay, good. You haven't scheduled them yet, but you've planted that seed or whatever you want to say to get them to get the idea. This is when you're going to see them. So assuming financial arrangements work out or whatever, when it comes time to finalize the schedule, you're seeing them Thursday at 10:30 most likely because most patients are more prone to listen to the doctor. That's who they will listen to more than anybody else in the practice. So that's the first thing I would do as the doc to get them thinking with, I need to come in the morning for this procedure, especially if you want to make primary time first thing in the morning. The next thing is, if I'm the scheduler and I'm getting into a whole, first off, if I think I have the option to not schedule them in the morning, that's just my decision. That's mistake number 1. If you tell me that the office policy is that primary procedures are seen in the morning, well, then that's what I have to do. You have an office policy that says staff are supposed to be there at 9 and I show up at 9:15 every day. You're probably going to fire me unless I'm amazingly productive because that's the rules. So if I'm the scheduler, I have rules. I have to put productive procedures in the morning. That's how this works, primary procedures. So I talk to a patient and I tell him the doctor only does these procedures in the morning. Oh, well, I can't come in ever in the morning. Never, ever, ever. Well, I have a choice at that point. And the choice that I should not take is just schedule you for some other time because it's not my call if the policy is that they have to be seen in the morning. That might be where I have to take a break. Excuse me 1 second. Let me just go grab the office manager so we can kind of sort this out. And the manager can make the call if that's their call. Or I have to handle the patient to come in the morning. Now, how do you do this? Because I've seen cases where, the doctor likes to do these types of procedures in the morning. Well, the patient doesn't, I'm not saying they don't care, but the fact that the doctor likes it isn't going to make them want to come in the morning. Some people maybe, but not everybody. I've also seen people say, well, that's when the doctor is freshest. I hate that. I've heard that for years. I think it's ridiculous because inevitably, what if for some reason I tell you I don't want to come in the morning and I end up on the schedule in the evening? What am I going to be thinking as the doctor walks in the room at 5 p.m. to do my crown prep as their hands shaking with the handpiece? No, he's not fresh. Oh my gosh, what's going on? So I'm not a fan of that excuse or method of handling that objection either. I think the simplest thing, and I've said this before, I've seen schedulers use it, it's very easy. For the scheduler, it should be very simple. Okay, so the doctor only does these types of procedures in the morning, so I have a morning appointment available here, and I have one here, where I might ask what day is best, etc. first, however you do it in your office. And the patient says, oh, I can't miss work, I don't want to come in the morning. You'd say, yeah, this is the only time the doctor does this, it's our office policy. Doctor does these types of procedures at this time on the schedule. Now, a couple things happen there. On the one hand, the patient's going to look at the doctor set this office policy. Well, there must have been a darn good reason. And yeah, it's not just better from a production perspective to do these procedures in the morning. It's just better overall for the office. Usually there's less volume and traffic in the morning and then in the afternoon. So this is when the doctor does them. But this isn't what you're saying to the patient. But the patient is thinking, well, there's a reason this policy is set. So the doctor only does this in the morning. There must be a good reason. So I think I need to follow the doctor's advice. Number two, there's not much a patient can do to argue about the policy. Some will, in which case that's when you grab the office manager, but you'll find it handles things about 70 to 80% of the time where the patient just goes ahead and schedules. So I say this only because you may have tried setting up primary time in the mornings and you think it's just a dream, a pipe dream. It's very easy to do. Our clients do it all the time, and that's how you do it. You want to do your primary procedures in the morning. That's at least my recommendation. We'll cover a little bit more as how you structure all this as we go on, but I wanted to throw that out there. All right, so you've laid out the different classes of procedure. The next thing you need to do, if you're trying to set up a system, or you're setting up the system that I'm going over with you here, is you need to determine procedure duration. You have to determine procedure duration, and I'm going to throw one other thing at you. Our recommendation is that you're operating off of 10-minute intervals in your appointment book. Now, by survey, I see that probably about 80% of offices operate off of 10-minute intervals, the other 20% operating off of 15-minute intervals. I am not a fan of a 15-minute interval because you might have an appointment that is really 50 minutes, 50. That cannot be represented in a 15-minute book. You can represent that in a 10-minute book. That 50-minute appointment in a 15-minute book becomes an hour, and you lose time. How you go about changing that, we'll discuss. But that's the first thing. You want to be on 10-minute intervals when you determine procedure length. So this is one of the larger steps to do to organize your schedule. You want to take a look at how long procedures take. Now, we're talking about from the time the patient is seated until they are dismissed. All right? Time they're seated until they're dismissed. And you're going to determine this. You're going to do two things when you determine this. First thing is you want to make sure the timing is realistic and uniform. And the second thing you want to do is you're going to build in a little bit of extra time because you're going to use these procedure lengths for constructing how you want your schedule to work. You're going to build in a little bit of extra time to account for the unexpected. So let's say you take a look at a crown prep. I come in the office as a patient. I'm seated at, and you can also record some of these if you want. You know, make notes of when this patient arrived and when they left, assuming the procedure went normally, if you can't think with how long these things actually take you. Most people can figure this out just by looking at it, but if you're having difficulty, I would actually time how long it takes. So let's say we take something like a crown prep. The time I'm in the office from when I'm seated to when I'm actually dismissed and sent up to the front, let's say, is 1 hour. 1 hour. Now, the doctor is not in the room for the entire hour, but the whole time is an hour. You then want to do this for all the procedures on the doctor's schedule. And I would start with the procedures that you tend to do the most of. It might be, basic restorations, endo, crowns. If you place implants or restore implants, you should have those figured out. And you might even want to make some variations in the sense of if I have, let's say you determine that in your practice, a crown prep is 1 hour start to finish from when I'm seated to when I leave. Again, the doctor's not in the room the whole time. We're going to talk about this. All right, crown prep's an hour, but let's say I'm coming in for 2 crown preps, maybe even in the same quad. Well, that's not going to be 2 hours. Do you see? That might be an extra 20 or 30 minutes. So, all right, 2 crown preps is an hour and 20 minutes or an hour and 30 minutes. This is where that 10-minute book becomes important. So you want to do this for most of the major procedures that you do in the practice. And if you're having difficulty with that, I might print a report from my software, which can tell you how many procedures you've done in a given period of time. I wouldn't focus on things I don't do a lot, or you'll drive yourself nuts because there's tons of CDT codes, right? We want to stick with what we tend to do the most of because that's the ones we're going to encounter the most. And I would also include no charge appointments in there too. If I'm delivering 1 crown, it's this long. 2 crowns is this long. If I'm delivering an onlay, it's this long, etc. And we just run through it and we work out how long each of these appointments take. All right, so I'm supposed to keep these 30 minutes or less. I will give you a warning that next week's episode is probably going to be a lot longer. I'm going to cut myself off here and we'll continue in next week's episode. And like I said, we're going to go over the rest of this information, which includes how your DA fits into all this, dental assistant. We're also going to figure out how to determine how much assistant time is in these procedures. We're going to talk more about productive double booking, structure, emergencies, and so on. Meanwhile, I want you to start looking at I would start doing this because you can start building your system now. Start looking at how long procedures in your office actually take. Again, from when the patient is seated until they are sent up to the front to check out with the dental assistant. Crowns, placing implants, whatever you want to look at that tends to be done as a fairly common procedure in your practice because we're going to use this data as we construct the schedule. Meanwhile, if you also want to get more data on scheduling, you can jump ahead of the class here. You can check out the Art of Scheduling Productively and the Schedule Coordinator training on DDS Success, our online platform. I'll put the link in the description. You could also come see us at the Scheduling for Production seminar here at MGE. I'll put a link to that as well. If you have any questions between now and next week's episode about what I've discussed, you can email me at jeffb@mgeonline.com or visit us online at mgeonline.com or call us at 800-640-1140. Folks, I hope this helps. Tell me how I did. I know that this is a bit of a complex subject, but I wanted to throw it out there, and I will see you at the next episode.